Welcome back, everyone.
Good morning.
Glad to see you all. We'll let everybody pop in and then we'll get right into it today, okay? Chip Limes, look at you being upside down. Did you do that on purpose?
I did not do it on purpose. It's that video problem that I'm still having. I'm using my, I'm not using my laptop's camera. I'm using the document camera. So I just got to go in and actually adjust it.
That's so funny.
But I got to remember how I did it. Let's see here.
Okay. While we're getting started, guys, go ahead and put your state initials in there, please. Just to give our panelists a little bit of context about the people that they're meeting with today. All right. Super. Just to check real quick. We didn't accidentally get any 201 folks in here today, have we? Okay, Kimberly, we need to shoot you over to your actual meeting. Kristen was kind enough to send me the link, so I'll drop that in the chat.
Thank you.
She's a smart lady. She thinks of everything. I just have to figure out how to copy and paste it with just that and not all the other stuff that's with it.
Get it through my
Okay.
email. You're fine.
All right, ready, paste. There's the link for where you're supposed to go. See you later, bye. Have fun with them. Any other 201 folks? Okay, well, today we're in for a special treat. We have Mallory Eaton from Overall Creek Elementary School in Tennessee and Angela Farino from Herbert Mills Middle School here just outside of Columbus in a suburb called Reynoldsburg. Both of these teachers have been doing PBL for a really long time. I've got a bunch of people in the waiting room. Hang on. I thought I got everybody. I'm going to pause. I have one person who it's been saying joining for 5 minutes.
When that's a student, it's usually, I'm not saying that's what's going on, but like if the internet's slow or if they're like playing games in other tabs.
And they forget.
Well, I'm like, close your other tabs and we'll let you in.
Come on. That's
Is
fine.
it my husband?
No, it's
Okay.
Yvonne.
Because he's not in here either. He said that it's telling him that the host won't let him in.
I don't have anybody in the waiting room now. And he's here. According to this. I don't see like.
Oh, he's here now. Okay.
Okay, we're gonna have a redo. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We have a PBL panel today made up of a teacher from Tennessee and a teacher from Ohio. In a second, we're going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Before we do that, I'm going to put our collaborative notes document in the chat. Feel free to add to these notes. We'll make sure that everybody has access to them after the course is over. Want to be able to give you guys some resources and a place to just sort of be able to jog your memory about this conversation. So we will get started with Mallory. Mallory, if you would, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know where you're from, what you do, and how you use PBL at your school.
Okay, well, I'm Mallory Eaton. This will be my 11th year of teaching. I've used PBL since my 3rd year of teaching when Overall Creek opened. And I taught 1st grade at the time, and then I switched to 5th grade 4 years ago. So this will be going into my 5th year in 5th. And we use PBL. We have 1 per quarter. And so we look at all of our standards for that quarter. And we talk about what connections they're going to be. We break down the standards so we truly know what those standards are asking students to be able to do. We look for those common themes within our standards. We try to pull in some real world with that as well, which typically engages the students and helps us come up with real world problems that they might be able to solve in a project to culminate the PBL. Am I going into too much already? I don't know how much you wanted. Okay, cool. We use community partners to help us design our problems and our projects. So for example, we've done a tire tread project multiple times, which we initially got the idea from an online resource, Try Engineering, but then when we pulled in our community partner, we kind of adapted it to some current problems that are going on in the tire industry. And so we keep our projects updated based on what real world issues are going on currently, based on our conversations with our community partners, because we're not tire experts, we're not bridge experts, so we really need those ideas from people that are experts in those areas so that we can figure out what is currently going on, that students would be able to research and solve. And then we have the students go through the engineering design process to work on that project. We typically do that in small groups, but really the purpose is for our standards to all build towards that culminating project. So they may relate through a universal theme. So if you haven't looked at Duke's universal themes, that's a way we connect a lot of our standards, because I am self-contained. So I teach everything. So it's hard sometimes to figure out what the connection is between certain things, but if you're using themes like patterns or change, it really is easy to connect things through those abstract ideas. I don't know. I could go on and on and on.
That's okay. We'll come back to more. Where is this Duke's Universal Themes? Could you, while Angie is introducing herself, pull the link and drop it in chat?
I definitely will.
Please and thank you. Thank you. Angie, take it away.
All right, my name is Angela Farino. This is going to be my 13th year of teaching. I taught 3rd grade for 11 years, and 2nd grade last year was my 1st year, and that's what I'm going to be doing again this year. When I was 3rd grade, I taught reading and social studies, so we were kind of, we had to work with our science and math counterparts, so I've had to do a lot of that. My school, Herbert Mills Elementary School, started when I was hired. It was a traditional school. And then about 3 years into it, we started talking about switching over to more STEM. And we became a STEM school. And then I believe 2 years ago, we became STEAM, but our STEAM is based on the humanities. And so all of our grade levels do quarterly, like Mallory said, we call them anchor assignments, but PBLs. And ours relate to the United Nations global goals, which is also a way to kind of bring everything in. Is most likely whatever problem you're looking at will relate to something bigger, and looking at those, and those are pretty broad. I mean, there's so many ways you can relate them. They're pretty broad. And so we usually will relate those somehow in of how it's a problem bigger than our community or bigger than our school. And so that's kind of where our A for STEAM comes into, is we really look at the globally. And we are a K-4 building, and each grade level does them in their own way. A lot of times we have ones that maybe don't switch up. When I taught 3rd grade, we had a project called Smart Reynoldsburg. They still do. And that one we were able to do every single year. It was a year-long project. They just had smaller parts along the way. where they looked at some of the global goals with sustainability. And we used a lot of our energy standards. And we were able, the students were tasked with coming up with how can we, ensure that Reynoldsburg, where we're from, will be sustainable in the next 50 years, like what will need to stay, what will change. And we worked with our city developers for that. That one we were able to do every year because it changes. We had people come in to talk to us about the future of transportation and mobility and all of that, and we could just keep updating that. Now, when I went to second grade last year, they happened to be building a park or wanting to build a park in Reynoldsburg. And so we were able to use a lot of our force in motion. And they also had some water quality problems there that we were able to do. But that one was kind of a 1-year one, because now that they're building the park, my students that were kind of working on designing what our community would need to have there, now that they're building it, we're not going to be doing that one anymore. So I think that's kind of part of the challenge, is sometimes you're going to have ones that you can do every single year and just keep updating them. But then there's some that, like this year, that's part of my challenge, is now we're kind of open and back to the drawing board of looking at our standards and figuring out what we'll do.
Awesome. Real quick, I want to make sure that you guys, I put the link in the chat for the global goals, but for 1 second, this is how we picked the statewide design challenge last year, was using the global goals, because I think Angel's right. Like, there's so many big topics, right? Quality education, zero hunger, gender equality, clean water, industry innovation and infrastructure, climate. So sustainable cities and communities. There are a number of things. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. We talked a little bit yesterday about how you're going to be doing these projects in the beginning of the year. This could be an opportunity to start to set some things around your classroom culture, or thinking about being problem solvers and innovators, and using this as a way to introduce the year and start to build around this idea of, the STEM habits or more critical thinking. All of that can connect. So just wanted to make sure that the global goals were something that you're aware of. I linked those in the collaborative notes document because that has proven to be super helpful for us at Battelle. Thank you. So who has the first question for our panelists?
Okay, I have a question, or we have a question. Okay, so this is kind of for Mallory. We have visited Overall Creek a few times, and our question is, when you do these big culminating activities, does the whole school follow the same theme? Like when we were there, we know one grade level like built the rafts, where another grade level built the ramps to go with it, and another grade level was studying the ocean, the different layers. So does the whole school follow the same theme per quarter?
They do not. That was that last year, or
It was a couple years
Yeah.
ago.
okay. Yeah, fifth grade typically does the boats at the end of the year. It's just something that they've done since the beginning, and the kids kind of look forward to that when they're going into fifth grade. So there were a couple years where fourth grade built the ramps to get the boats into the creek. But no, we don't typically have a theme per quarter. We
Okay.
really look at our standards in order to come up with that culminating project. So it just happened to work out that year, especially at the end of the quarter, because you have taught most of your standards, especially in testing grades for mastery at that point. So you have a little bit more freedom to kind of incorporate some other things.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question for Mallory. Mallory, at your school, do you have someone that's a liaison between the school and community partners? How do you keep from over asking, or one grade level asking a company to do something and then another calling the same people? Is there someone that kind of coordinates that?
We have typically someone in each grade level that does that for the team. But then those people might collaborate with one another as well. I know we have a few community partners that do collaborate with multiple grade levels and have for several years. And they want to be a part of that. So we love that. We appreciate that. But we kind of talk about it as a team, you know, what are some ideas? And then we have that one person reach out. But we haven't really had any issues with, I mean, as far as I know, people feeling like they're being asked to do too much. A lot of times they ask to come back again. So we love our community partners for sure. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. I've been to your school several times. My daughter teaches there, Hannah Hill.
Yeah.
She's on the way back from the beach, so she says hello. I told her.
Oh, tell her I said hey.
I will. And I went to the STEM, the thing that you guys had that was a kind of a with your city STEM wall, or I can't remember what it was called, but that was amazing. The different challenges they had set up. You have a STEM coordinator in your that helps with those things.
Yes, for Murfreesboro City Schools, Leah Barch does that. Well, she's over science and social studies, but I feel like she kind of has taken that role on somewhat, if that makes sense.
Yes. Thank you.
And I will add, one of the things we do at our school for the community partnerships, not everyone is comfortable asking for those. So we kind of at the beginning of the year start a Google Doc of all the ones we use, and we put like the phone number and who it is, and then which, kind of like what Mallory said, it's either a grade level or who used them and who was the contact person. That way we can kind of, if you're brainstorming ones or you want to use one that somebody else had used, you can go and see who had contacted them before. And we kind of keep like a running list of our partners. And then we also try to include other grade levels when we're trying to reach out, when we're trying to figure out who our partners could be. Because a lot of times there's just 4 of us thinking about it, you know, somebody in another grade level might be related to somebody that could help, you know, or something like that too. But we find a Google Doc is really helpful just to keep track of who the main contact person is for the partners.
If you don't have a strong culture of collaborating with community partners today, or like when you go back to school in August, you certainly can go to your administration. Every school in Ohio is mandated to have a business advisory. So even if the school doesn't have it, surely there's one at the district level. So speak with your building leadership and say, hey, do we know who's working with which community partners? How do we figure that out? That way, we might be able to take advantage of existing relationships that already exist in the school and reach out to the people who kind of own those relationships or who have initiated those relationships to begin with, to make sure that you're not going over top of someone. I know in Akron, they've got a Firestone, and they have someone to kind of like specifically manage the relationship with Firestone. So try to figure out what systems exist already in your school or district, and then use that to your advantage to be able to create some efficiencies for yourself. And again, that Google Doc idea is really good because it might get other people to list things. You could have teachers who have community partners that you don't even know about, that you could take advantage of. Terry, I think you had your hand raised, and then there's a question in the chat. We'll go Terry first and then chat.
I had my hand raised, but I think you guys are answering as I'm going, because I'd be coming in as a teacher and nobody in my school does the problem-based learning. And so when you're looking at this, I hear you're going, the whole school does, and it sounds like, oh my goodness, that's so neat. You know, how do you gear people to do what you're doing if you don't have it as a school way of doing things?
I think sorry, Angela, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to say, I think that's that's a hard part. And even like when new teachers come in, that's hard to get them started when, especially like first year. And there are people that are kind of used to the way they teach and it works, and they don't, want to. So I think the first thing is you just trying it and you doing it. They're going to think it's cool. The kids are going to be super engaged in it too. So like just leading through example is good. But I also think being willing to meet with them. We don't have like a STEM person at our school, but I'm like a district I'm second grade, but each school has like a deeper learning is what we call them. And so I try to keep it open and I try to keep communication, like I go to grade level meetings and things like that, like how can I help? Writing essential questions or coming up with hooks. So I think being open to kind of help out, because I think it is a little scary at the beginning, and I think I think people want to have that answer and like they already know what the final product is going to look like. And that's the scariest part is you don't necessarily, like, you don't know. The kids are going to kind of come up with that. And like Mallory said before, like the experts, like we're not experts in whatever our community partners are and so teaching something that you may not know everything about can be scary too. And I think just having that openness and it's a big jump. I get that.
I was gonna say almost the exact same thing. I've been lucky enough to, be surrounded by people that were doing it too, but I know Cherry Ross was one of the first people to start it when we were at the school prior to Overall Creek. And I remember her telling stories about how the kids from other classrooms would kind of be like looking into her room, like kind of like looking back as they're walking by, because they're like, what are they doing in there? And it did kind of spread a little bit because PBLs are so engaging and the kids have so much fun with it. I think other teachers and other students are going to be like, what's going on in that classroom? So I definitely think that just dive in and don't expect for it to look perfect the first time. I think that's part of the scary thing too. As teachers, sometimes we can be perfectionists and we want everything to go as planned. And, like Angela said, we want to know what the end project is going to look like, but you really don't. You have to let some of that go a little bit. So just trying it and being okay with maybe it going a different direction than what you thought it was going to go, because you improve and you learn more through the process that you don't learn if you don't just go in and dive in and go for it. But it is hard and it is scary. But you just have to try it, and it does kind of spread. So.
Thanks. Both of those are helpful. Let's look in the chat. Can you share some specific examples of ways or how you worked with community partners?
I can start. I'll say this kind of goes with another question I just saw about like the kickoff and stuff, or the hook. I use the community partners to help with the hook, to help. I try to have them come in whenever possible to kind of share what their problem is. So it's not, me saying it's their problem, it's them saying, hey, we need help with this. So like for our playground project, we had our city developer come in and say, here's what we want to do. Right now, there are 3 ponds here that we need, they're water runoff, so they're important. We need the community to know that they're important. How can we do that, which was part of our project? And then, what type of park? Well, it started as a playground, but it ended up being more of a, what kind of park does our community need here? Like, we want your help designing it. And the kids immediately went to playground, which ended up being a small part of it, but they ended up realizing too that there was so much more. They're building a huge area of stores like across the street, and the library is across the street. So a lot of people that might want to use this park may not be wanting a playground. They might just want a shady spot to eat, and things like that. And so we used our community partners to kind of kick off, as well as we have them come back in as an authentic audience to kind of give suggestions at the end. I will say the improve part of everything was the hardest part for me when I got started, because we kind of like, when they finished, they were done, they shared. But I try to have the community partners come back in, even if it's through like Zoom, or even if we share videos with them and then they give us suggestions at the improve part of it, before the final share. And that final share might just be to parents, or it might just be to other students, but like, having those community partners come back in and kind of give suggestions, or have them share what they came up with the community partners is how we use them the most.
We've used them that way as well to kick off units. Sometimes they'll make a video, sometimes we'll Zoom, sometimes they'll actually come in. We've also used them, as Angela said, as the end presenting, to kind of give feedback and such. But like I mentioned before, we as teachers and as teams have met with them too, prior to even like laying out the project, so that we can gather a little bit of background knowledge and let them help us word the project itself so that it has the correct language in it, or have them kind of brainstorm the criterion constraints with us, since they are the experts in those areas. And then we've also used them because a lot of our projects involve the engineering design process. We've had them come and help present information as well and talk about their career, just to expose students to careers and things like that as well.
Excellent, thank you. Let's go to chat. There's lots of great questions in chat. There was a question about like level of enthusiasm. What proportion of class is typically excited and what proportion isn't? What do you do to boost enthusiasm about who aren't excited?
Typically for me, my kids are excited about it. I don't normally have to prod it along. You know, we do try to have some kind of hook. And it normally reels them in. I think the culminating project for us is something that the kids look forward to. You know, Angela had said that sometimes their projects repeat from year to year, sometimes they don't. Our kids typically know too, like if they're coming into 5th grade, they know they're building that boat at the end of the year. Or, you know, we've done the tire treads a few years and they know, and so like they've seen it. We have STEAM walks where the students walk around and see other students' projects each quarter. So they kind of know. And if it's not something that they have seen before, they're excited about it. I don't normally have to do a lot more than, you know, with a community partner presenting it, or if we're presenting it, they're normally pretty hooked. I know tire treads sound like what 5th graders want to do that, but they really do, because they know they're going to get to talk and research and work together and meet with, like I feel like the student buy-in is there with PBL.
I 100% agree. I think when they know, a lot of times with the hook, they kind of know, like my students knew at the end of everything, they were going to be designing a park. So they didn't mind doing all of the little steps we did along the way before they got to that park, because they knew that it was leading up to that. Or the one we did in 3rd grade that repeats, like the sustainable city. It used to be a tiny miniature cardboard city and they saw it every single year in our like innovation nights. And then it ended up being a virtual city. And they see that and they want to get to 3rd grade, you know, to make that city. I also think along the way, like even the research stuff, you can make more fun. In 2nd grade, I had a lot of non-readers this past year, like a lot. And so even the research, like I set up like a virtual research room, which is, I think I took one from somebody else, you know, even on, you can find them now from COVID and everything. Like there's, and then I just put a bunch of videos, like lots of questions and videos. And so they spent weeks and weeks just, you know, watching videos, which was much more engaging to them, and just, you know, kind of making notes in their groups of what they're learning. And so I think there's ways of making it more engaging, the parts that may not be as engaging at first. But I do think if you hook it well enough and they know what the end result will be, they'll want to keep, you know, doing those little things to get there.
I think too, you know, with the research, they know they have to have research to back up what they end up building or creating or designing in the end. You don't get to build, create, or design in the end if you have no research to support it. And so that's kind of a driving factor as well. They know that. You don't even have to tell them that. They figured it out along the way, at least by the time they get to 5th grade. Like you don't get to slack off during the research component of the PBL and then still get to design at the end. So I think that's motivating in itself.
Thanks. A lot of that sounds like that culture is what you expect and accept from one another, right? If you expect that kids know, like, here's where we're headed. Here are the steps to go along the way. These are the things that we get to do. And this is like the thing you get to do at the end. They'll play along. The other thing, we had a really strong reflection from a teacher who completed this course last year. And he said, I took a unit the kids hate and I struggle with every year. And he said, I was overwhelmed with the amount of enthusiasm and energy and excitement and level of participation. He said, it made me love teaching again. He said, yeah, it was harder. He's like, but everybody had such a better time doing it that it made it completely worth it to be able to make that happen. There's a bunch of questions in the chat, but one of the things I want to talk about with Mallory and Angie is around starting small. Like I heard you say, Mallory, a minute ago, like, or sorry, Angie, like kids watch videos for weeks. Unfortunately, because of the constraints of this grant that we have, our teachers need to do this by the end of September. And there have been a lot of questions, and we have a lot of people who've never implemented PBL before. So can you help us think about scaling this to a manageable amount of time and a little bit of encouragement around starting small and how that's okay?
Yeah, that was a year-long project. That's why it took us. We did little bits of it. I think the hardest part for getting started is the essential question. And I thought I saw something about that. And honestly, that's my hardest part too. I think asking your partners like what is a problem they have. But I also think my kind of go-tos are the idea of efficiency or quality or improving. And I'm sure there is something that can be more efficient or something that, you know, you can improve the quality of or something like that to help you get started with the question. I always start with how, like, how can you either like improve or design or create. So that's how we usually get started. And I do think it doesn't have to be, like she said, ours was a year-long thing, but we had to break it down. And we post the design cycle. I know that they look different, but like we post that so students kind of see like along the way, what are we going to be doing? Which kind of helps us keep moving too. Having planning pages that have the constraints on there, you know, and giving them brainstorming time. But I also think putting some of this into your reading and writing, like it's really easy to add persuasive writing to it, or, you know, having your informational. If you already have standards that you have to teach like that first quarter, which is when it's going to be, figuring out a way to having this be part of that. So you're not, you know, you can use as much time during the day as you can. That research part might be, you know, the videos and things, they might be writing quick little, you know, persuasive letters to the company, or they might be, you know, reflecting in an informational little paragraph about what they learned from their research, but having that be part of what you're already doing, so you're not having to find this extra time, will allow you to get more of it done too.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely shouldn't it definitely shouldn't be in addition to what you would normally do. It should replace in a sense. So think about the standards that you were like Angela said, that you were going to do in quarter one anyway, and think about how those standards connect. Maybe find a real world connection or issue, or look at those global goals that she had mentioned and try to find things that connect, so that you're still teaching the same content, the same standards. You're just doing it in a more connected, real world way. I feel like I lost I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought. I might get it back. I don't know.
It happens. We have lots of questions. We'll hold on the community question, the community partner question. I teach 6th grade science and I have 4 classes with about 100 total students. There are 2 other science teachers with 100 students each. Content leader for science. I really need a resource that talks about how to manage multiple classes instead of one group of kids when it comes to PBL. Both of you teach different groups of kids, right?
I did when I was 3rd grade for like 11 years. Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Because part of that was virtual too. Google Classroom. I mean, I know people are already using that, but using that for things like this, one of their topics was related to our PBL. And that's part of what they had to do when they would come with me. And then when they weren't with me, it was a way to kind of connect what they could do asynchronously, because they're going to have to do part of it when they're not with you, most likely. That was one big way we did that. It was a way to connect with the math and science teacher, so that she was also doing similar stuff. When we were doing our sustainable city, I might be having them read and write, about some of the research they were doing with it, and she might be teaching them about energy and how that would play into the project. And so I think we would use Google Classroom, or we would, use different things to have them share out together and try to connect it as much as possible.
Awesome. What other questions do you guys have? There's a couple more in the chat, but I want to give people who are not in chat a chance to ask questions.
I put mine in chat, but I don't mind asking in person.
Yeah.
Regarding the community members, our community partners, if we have a problem that is real world, that we know to be a real world problem, or a problem right out of the field, do you necessarily have to involve community members as part of PBL? Like, is that a necessity?
I would say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We always do as well. Our principal encourages us to have one for every quarter.
Okay.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be, it could even be like a video they make or a letter they write. Like, I know when I first got started, I would make a lot of the letters and pretend like I was somebody out, from the city or something like that. But just that little tweak of having them write a letter, like if they don't have time to come in or something like that, kind of saying, hey, we need your help, here's our problem. The students are going to be much more engaged if they feel like they are really solving a real world problem, and that is connected, and someone else outside of their school, needs help with something.
I think it's okay to
Thank
start
you.
small. Like when we first started, we might use people within the school or people's spouses that have other jobs. So I think it can be daunting to think, oh my gosh, I have to send all these emails, or I have to call these people, and I have to find someone. But there are people probably, that are in the school, or spouses, or kids that are have older kids of teachers in the building, that it's quick. It's not this huge thing that you have to reach out to all these people.
I actually hadn't thought of that, and that's a really good idea, because honestly, so I'm a precision machining teacher, and teachers are bringing us parts to machine all the time. Like, that's one of our biggest, I guess, and that is a community member. You don't think of them as that necessarily. It's just part of it, I guess. But thank you. I appreciate that.
I think it's kind of like the thing we talked about the other day. Like, you can tell your students or your children, your own personal children, the same thing 1,000 times. But if another person comes in and says that thing, it's like a new level of credibility that you yourself don't have, just because you're familiar to them already. This is why we bring in community partners and have this discussion, and the discussion that we had yesterday. Just a different voice talking sometimes resonates more than the voice that they hear every day. Even though, Joe, like, you have a background in manufacturing, like, and they know that, but I think if someone else comes in and doubles down on some stuff that you say, your credibility kind of increases too. Like, oh, maybe he does know what he's talking about. So for me, that's why community partners make all the difference. Plus, novelty sometimes goes a long way in the classroom, right? Like, oh, it's a different thing happening today. The other thing that I think, the reason that community partners matter, the reason that presentations of student learning matter, schools and teachers are probably some of the most like under fire people like in the world right now, right? The more times you could give your community members an opportunity to see how brilliant you are, how brilliant your students are, the fact that you are doing work that connects to the real world, the fact that you're engaging second graders to reimagine their community, the more you're going to help kind of like disabuse some of the bad ideas that people have about what's happening in schools, and give you an opportunity to shine and have your kids shine, and give people an opportunity to talk about something from a perspective that they know. I was in that school last week. They're not, you know, a bunch of whatever. They're doing great work. So I think that's another good reason to bring in community partners. One question that we have from a different panel that I think is relevant. What do you do? How do you keep kids moving forward and keep people on a schedule, but also give people the opportunity to like have some flexibility to explore at their own pace? How do you create that balance between working towards a deadline, but also giving people a chance to use the design cycle, back up, maybe scrap their project and go forward again?
For me, you know, I've taught first, I've taught fifth. I do have to keep them, they're not all working exactly at the same pace, but I feel like we're in the general area. Like I have to set deadlines. I have to say your research has got to be done by this point, and then we're all moving on with whatever you have. There are times where I have a group that they've started designing. They're like, "Ooh, we need to go look up that." I'm like, "Go," but you have 10 minutes to do it, or 5, you know, because they could research for weeks if you let them. So you have to set deadlines. You have to map out on your own on a calendar or something. How long in a perfect world do they have to do this? Do they have to do this? And you have to keep them paced, because I mean, they could sit there and build for 3 weeks, but we don't have 3 weeks. You have 2 class periods. So just, I mean, sticking to deadlines, setting those deadlines, mapping it out yourself too, so you kind of know. And then to be honest, I have groups that sometimes like they don't get to redesign because you didn't design quick enough. And when we tested, you weren't ready to test. We had to test either what you had, or you were worried it was going to get ruined through that testing situation. So we kind of move forward and you just didn't get to that point. Because the reality is we have so much to teach in such a small amount of time, and we have to keep moving. I hope that answered that question.
I would say the real world has deadlines, and making sure that they know, like, hey, and we have deadlines. So when I said I posted the design cycle, part of that also is to keep me on the deadlines, to keep me, you know, because I could keep altering it, keep changing it. But they can kind of see like, this is where we're going to end up, and here's where we're at, and this is where we have to keep going. But I also think coming up with things that the students can do that do get a little bit ahead, you know, and that's where I think you have some choices. And that's where I think some of the virtual researching and things like that is fun to kind of say, hey, if you're here, you know, you're working on this. If you're done, why don't you go back and see if you can improve this? Or you walk by and you say, hey, I wonder if that could, you know, and then walk away. And now they've got to start thinking about it again. But I think for me, posting the design process somewhere and kind of showing where we're at and then where we need to be, or those deadlines around with it, kind of helps them know where we're at and when we have to be finished, but also me.
Thank you. This is your floor, guys. We have 15 minutes. Please ask all the questions that you have.
I have a question about homework. Once we get muted here. Thanks. How much of it is done outside of class time? Like, for example, I only teach math. And last year we had issues with homework that we had to kind of deal with across the grade level, to the point where, for example, I stopped giving any at all. So I'm just curious how much of the PBL would be done outside of class.
I don't assign any of it outside of class.
I would agree. I don't know what happened to my video, but I would agree. We don't, at my school, we don't do homework. We just got, you know, we got rid of all that. And so none of that. I will say, I do a lot of like the must do, may do, where like, here are the things you have to get done during this time. And then like, here are the things you can do if you get done. And sometimes that may do might, like, hey, if you get done with this, here are some things you can do. Sometimes that might be a little part of it. So that if they get done with other things, they can work on some of that, but we don't do any homework at our school.
Angela, do you not do homework at your school, like ever period, or not related to the design challenge?
Ever period.
Got it. So it's not part of your school's culture to have homework.
Correct.
Therefore, you
Correct.
have to build it in.
We kind of tell them that we want them to give us 110% when they're there. And when they do that, when they go home, they've got, too many other things. Plus, we tended to find out that the kids that do it don't necessarily need the practice. And the kids that didn't do it didn't necessarily have the support or, know how to do it at home, which is, they needed the support in school. So that's kind of why we did that, got rid of it.
Sure. Can you talk about, Mallory, do you have a thing to say?
I was just going to say, we have a very similar thing going on at our school as well. With the only thing we do is 20 minutes of reading every night. So we don't have that at all as well. Go ahead.
So for schools that do have homework, how can you build in some assignments to maybe get you from what you did in class today to what you're going to do tomorrow? Have you seen any models where that might work, or things that you could do to get there?
I wonder if, like I said, we do have reading. I wonder if, they do go read maybe a selected research, I don't know, article of some type, just to build background. I mean, you wouldn't want it to be too complex or, but just to build background possibly on something that you were going to talk more about in class. I don't know.
I would also say, like for math, right? Like if you know that there are particular math functions that students would need to do to help solve their problem, you could make your assignments tied to things that they might encounter while they're doing their PBL.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to move away from homework just myself personally. And it's kind of a battle that we've been dealing with, particularly in my grade level. So that's why I was asking how much of it was done outside of class, because I'm trying to myself to move away from it as much as possible.
You know how we talked yesterday about kids like tearing tape, and because you're at elementary, right, Craig?
Yes.
Like tearing tape or cutting, like, could you get them to practice measuring something that way if they don't practice measuring something, or something that they can like do and touch at their house? That way, if they don't do it, like, it's not the end of the world, but they still have some responsibility to do some exploration at home by themselves.
Right.
But it's not going to like make them bomb their end of unit test if they don't go and measure the thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering, if it could even be some of their, like, if they've met as a group and brainstormed what they want this design or whatever they're doing to be, then maybe it could be as simple as, like, if you're at home and they want to draw out their idea, before they meet back with the group. And then you could even give some time, maybe in the morning the next day, for those students that maybe hadn't had a chance to do that yet. That way, when they, especially if you're low on time, that way when they do get back together, they could kind of share what they each came up with, and then how could they combine, or, something like that. It could be a way to incorporate home a little bit. We always found, we used to do little design challenges at home. And then there would just be those students that didn't, would come in with nothing. And it was, pretty humiliating for them. So I think even if you have homework, given that time in the morning, or some sort of time where they could complete it at school for those ones that couldn't do it at home.
Thanks. Julia, go ahead and ask your question.
I was just going to say, especially with my 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, our kids collaborate on Google Slides. We're a Google school. So if they do it out, and I tell them, hey, you guys can do this at home from your phone if you research at home, and you can talk to each other. And then when you come to school, the physical materials you need, the tape and the cardboard, and I will provide those at school. But you can do that outside, and then, you can do it at night after school if you want to. They don't have to, but a lot of times those overachievers, and I have several of those, they will work their guts out outside of school. So they'll be ready when they get there. Just a thought.
I'm on mute. Cheryl, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, all of this is, these are elementary and middle school teachers. So I'm thinking on a high school level where I am, the collaboration might seem to be, to me, a little bit different with the elementary versus a high school, where we have all these different courses and so forth that we have to take. And I am the only STEM teacher, and I have like 5 different preps because I have 3 different STEM levels, plus I teach a science class. And it sounds great, but it concerns me, the workload that would have to, I don't know, as far as how does this work on high school? Is it the same type of process? Does more people have to be involved? Because I mean, I'm sure they have to be, but you know, we have like a math department, English, arts, music, and they're all over the place. They do have homework, you know. Of course, I don't do homework because of my kind of courses, but I'm more flexible than a lot of the other teachers. So I'm trying to figure out how, and I want to try to get our school to be a STEM school, but to get everybody to collaborate. You talk about having partners to talk about. I am the only person who can talk about STEM, you know, and what we need to do to bring it in. So how does that work for me or for high school?
I can't speak to the high school part. I know that we have a STEM high school here in Reynoldsburg, and I know that they do things. I do think they collaborate a little bit, but I also think some of the teachers do things based on whatever they teach. But I can tell you, we had, when we first got started with STEM, we kind of don't have an art teacher. We have she's ICE lab. It's kind of like an engineering class. It would be similar probably to what, you know, like a STEM class when we started. And she started coming around to like the grade level meetings or meeting with those teachers and saying like, how can what I do support you, you know, or something like that. That way, when they went to her, she's a special. So when they go to her once a week, she may not be doing something completely different. She may be doing something that kind of supports our playground, you know, project or something like that. And so we kind of use our ICE lab person kind of as a resource for us. And so I wonder if it could start small of you saying like, hey, what projects are you working on? And maybe coming up with a way that you could support them and maybe make that project more STEM, you know, with you. I don't know how your position works, but that was the way that we had someone that had a special kind of like a STEM class when we first got started would support us and kind of show us how we could make what we're already doing more PBL, more STEM.
I also think you got to start where you're at, right? And if you're in a school today that doesn't have a strong culture of working interdisciplinarily on PBLs, like we don't do PBLs yet, like you have to figure out how to keep it self-contained in your room, Cheryl, particularly if you already aren't working across with your other people. Also, given the constraints of this in particular project, like you have a month. And so what can you do to create a PBL this time that's just for your kids in your classroom, period by period? And then maybe living in the design cycle, you can reflect on that and think throughout the year, like what are opportunities that I could connect what we're doing in this room with what they're doing in other rooms, and look at other projects that you see hanging in the halls or things that you hear from the other students. And then maybe set a goal for next time, like maybe I can collaborate with one person. So I think like we have to remember that we're talking to 2 teachers who've been doing PBL in a school with a super strong PBL culture for a really, really long time. And that's not where everyone's starting today. So if you go from doing 0 PBL to doing 1, like pretty short, but you know, robust PBL this year, that's tremendous improvement. So don't get like thinking that you have to go to like the fullest possible expression. We're just trying to move from where you are right now to a tiny bit step forward. Does that help? The last thing I was hoping that our panel could talk about is rubrics. Because you talk about how you give students credit for things along the way. How many like different things did they turn in for you to evaluate what they've learned along the way? So that, you know, you're doing all this, but there's a grade attached, but everything's not riding on that final project.
I know for me, like I said, I teach everything. And so there might be a math lesson that's specifically about, you know, area or volume or something. Those lessons may not even look like they're part of a PBL, if that makes sense, but it does lead towards the end project. So I think, you know, sometimes people hear PBL and they think we're doing all this added extra stuff, but I had to teach those standards anyway. So the assignments that you're doing along the way look like typical assignments. You might just be connecting them to this bigger idea that you're heading towards. And then as far as the project itself, there are components along the way that I look for. You know, I take grades on their research notes, or if there was a particular article that they read about a particular concept, and they had to, you know, write a summary or something, I would grade that. And then I do use a rubric for the final project as well. They change a little bit depending on what the project is. But just, you know, and I even have them reflect and evaluate themselves as teammates, and did they work cooperatively together? That's always a part of it too. We have speaking and listening standards. So those are part of their presentation and their group work and their collaboration. But I think sometimes, you know, the people forget that the assignments along the way, they didn't look like PBL lessons. They didn't look like you were building a project. We were working on, you know, multiplying multi-digit numbers or something. So that's a part of it too. So it's not in addition to, it's replacing, it's just a more connected way of teaching your content anyway. So the grades are not that, I mean, the end project, it might be different, but along the way, it's really not different, probably from what you're doing right now anyway.
So more intentional weaving.
Yeah. I would say too, like, you don't have to have, a lot of people think the final rubric has to have like literally everything on it. And it's like what she said, we may not, we might hit things along the way and I may get grades along the way. So the final rubric doesn't have that. Our district is also really pushing the SEL standards, and being in second grade, I would say start small with that too. Like with small groups, especially coming back from a pandemic, like it was eye-opening how students struggled, you know, to work with that. And so we made a rubric. It was as simple as the beginning. We had all the students kind of talk to me about what they would need to have a good teammate or a group member, you know, like, and then they each picked one of those that was kind of going to be their goal. And then they reflected on that at the end. So they didn't have to focus on like all of them. You know, we weren't working on we weren't working on all of the soft skills. But then the group also made a group contract, which we kind of used too, where they, as a group, picked like 4 or 5 of those. Here's what we want to make sure we work on to make sure we get things done. And they read through those and reflected on those every single time they worked together. And that was kind of a way for them to self-assess along the way as well. And have them come up with a rubric too. Like, what are we going to need to know and find out? And what do we want to, you know, how are we going to assess, you know, have them come up with some of that wording too.
Thanks. I think we have time for one more question. Do you ever use a daily journal?
I'm not sure what that looks like. What is meant by a daily journal, I guess.
Nancy, can you clarify your question?
Yeah. In one of my classes, a number of my classes, we use like a daily digital journal where there's a question that they reflect on at the beginning and then they reflect on after the lesson. So for the PBL, do you have a journal that you could even use as part of your rubric, perhaps? And mine was a digital one. It was just like a slide deck that they used in Google Classroom. And so I could always go in and see what they had done. And it was a pre-made one with questions ahead of time. So it was like the bell work. They would, as they're coming in, they just come in and they would, reflect on it. So it didn't have to necessarily be any right or wrong answers, but they were always putting in their thoughts about what they were doing that day. And then there was a reflection at the end of class as they were wrapping up.
I think you definitely could. I think PBL is something that you totally make your own, what you want your students to do each day to show their learning or represent their thinking or their reflection. I know I use a lab notebook, and we also have pages in our journal where we go back to our overarching questions so that they can reflect on that throughout the unit. But I think incorporating things that you already do makes PBL more manageable, as long as it's connecting to what you're intending to connect to or what your project is leading to. I think making it comfortable for you, but still doing PBL, but then doing some of the things that you always do. I don't think it's a completely, it is new way of thinking, but you're using best practices that you would use in instruction that's not tied to a PBL. So yes, if that's something that you want to use, I say, yeah, for sure, you could.
If any of you are familiar with Invention Convention or Invention League in Ohio, they used to have, I'm looking for it right now, a really great journal that helps kids go through the steps of the design cycle through their investigation, draw a sketch of your solution, build your prototype. What changes did you make along the way? So definitely that's something where we talked about the other day, where you can get kids to document their journey. And even if it's just like a bell ringer activity, you come in and what are 3 facts that you learned about whatever your topic is. You can do all of that just so too, they have a record that they started at not knowing anything about this topic to, whoa, look at all the stuff I know now about this thing. Sometimes that's really neat. Excellent. Well, Angela, Mallory, we thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate you being here. We know that this is something that is new, but you guys were new and now you've been doing it for years and years. And so this is just the beginning of the process for a lot of folks, and that's okay. Do you have one final part or last nugget of wisdom at all?
I think you just have to dive in and try it and be okay with it not being perfect, because it's not going to be, but you learn a lot through that. And also, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed talking about PBL.
Super. Thank you so much. Angela, do you have a last nugget of wisdom for this group?
I would add on to what she said, is just be flexible. And it's okay to not know where it's going to go. It's okay to not know what the end result is going to be. And it's okay to not be the expert and know everything about the topic, related to it. You're going to kind of learn as they go too.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, y'all. We'll talk to you. All right, for this group, let's take a 10-minute break. We do not have too terribly much this afternoon or moving forward. I want to make sure that before we leave, so please don't let us leave without us deciding how we want to record the resources that you guys have captured. Really, I think the questions are, do we want to do it on Padlet or Jamboard, like some sort of sticky note thing, or do we want to just shove them into a Google Doc? So we'll have a little discussion about that when we come back, and we'll take 10 minutes. So please come back at 44 after. Thank you.
Hey, Heather.
Yes.
Hey, I read this book. This book,
Yes.
really, really good. I made lots of notes and I have to go back through it and grab all my notes, but I'm really struggling for a middle school. I mean, those teachers teach a 4th grade classroom and it's, of course, self-contained. I'm really needing something that me with having multiple, I'm scared, like I get a speaker, or if I do something, I'm not gonna have 6 teams of kids. I'm gonna have 24 teams, doing things that it just seems like it's gonna be a lot of the same thing. I just don't, I need something to read, or I need somebody to talk to that's done this in middle school.
Okay, well, we can hook you up with Sandy Gento. She has done middle school PBL forever.
Awesome.
But I also think that maybe we can do a little bit of group think around your particular problem, okay? If that's all right, we can pivot a tiny bit. We've got some time this morning. So is everybody okay with that? If we spend a little bit of time just sort of thinking through this? All right, I'm gonna put my hair up and we're just gonna play for a minute. Okay. Deb Gray, who do you teach?
I have 6th grade science.
6th grade science, okay. And how many classes of 6th grade science do you teach?
I will have 4 classes this year with probably, I hope no more than 25 in each class, but sometimes, it goes up. We don't know from year to year, but it should be about 25 of a class. And so, I have ideas and I think about, if I had one group of 6th graders all day long and I had 6 teams working on something, I can see how that would work especially if they're communicating with people outside of the school. But if I have 4 classes and they're doing, sending letters or whatever, it's going to be a lot of.
And you don't have to do all that, right? So you have 4 classes, like let's say maximum 30 kids. And do you see those kids every day?
Yes.
Okay. And what are the first couple things that you teach those kiddos when they first come to school in August?
What I've typically have been doing first is what is science, because the way our curriculum was done when I first moved to this school system, they were teaching the back of the book. The very last chapter is what is science and the engineering process. So I, of course, when I became content leader, pulled that to the very beginning. So we do what is science, measurement tools, engineering design process, that type of thing is the first few weeks.
Okay. So could you do, well, first of all, does anybody have anything that just comes at them like right away around the topic of what is science?
I just have a quick question. What kind of technology access do you have in the classroom? Like, do you have a smart board? Do you have a Clever Touch? Do you have what do kids have access to and what do you have access to?
We are, I guess, I'm not sure if you could say one-to-one because students can't take them home anymore, but we have Chromebooks. Each student has a Chromebook. We're getting new 75-inch TVs this year, so they're taking away the smart board capability. I have a PBL designed for later in the year where I've worked with a community partner that's going to got a grant in the process to buy us water testing kits, and we're going to take a field trip, and that's going to be a huge one, and it's going to be more like March, April. But I guess what I'm worried about is not only do I have to duplicate the PBL in my 4 classes, but I have 2 other science teachers that, I have to be sure that we're all doing the same thing. And so we're going to be duplicating this, 12 times a day, and so I'm not really sure how to, get that, make sure we're not doing things that we can't duplicate.
You can do the same thing all day and you just have to break it down into steps, right? So let's say that let's pretend that we do a 2-week PBL. around what is science. Let's just pretend.
Okay.
And let's say something like, I'm making this up. I need you guys to help me like riff off of this, okay? How does our community use science to solve problems? Right. Or maybe we back up. I'm literally just making this up, but how does science show up in our community? Right? And you could do an exploration where everyone has to find a news article that cites scientific facts. Surely there's going to be some kind of natural disaster going on. I hate to say that, but right? Like there's.
We always have disasters. There's a huge sewer problem right now in our town, so.
Right? Weather, water, maybe there's like some kind of engineering thing. Right? Who knows? But maybe you guys could, as like a hook activity, talk about something that's happening in engineering, science in your community, right? And maybe you could have a hook activity where you get someone in science to come talk. Maybe you could find 3 or 4 different people, like 1 per period. Dear local meteorologist, come and talk to our class about how you study science. So bring in X number of speakers to talk about their job in science.
That's what I was thinking, like, depending on what technology, if you can't find a number of speakers for each class, you can tape one. And then you can always, like, we have our Clever Touch here and we just mirror stuff to our products. And
That's a great idea.
So that way, if you're having one speaker, tape them once and then distribute it to your co-teachers.
That's a good idea. I had not considered that because I was thinking either put the classes together, maybe have just one large, class. The principals, I met with him yesterday and he's willing to let us use some of the related arts time. So maybe the speaker would be speaking to the whole group, all 300 of them at once, that kind of thing.
Deb, you had mentioned that you're having like a sewage treatment problem or in your community. I mean, I used to, before COVID, take all my kids down, I call it the poo plant, and give them a tour so that, when they get a drink or they flush, they know exactly what's going on. And I've had, one of the gentlemen, he'll come in, he'll talk to everybody, and there's a lot involved with that as far as, it's all gravity fed for the most part. Some of it has to have a lift station, and how does it affect the community? What happens if you don't have it, and there's all kinds of science that's involved with that, and the bacteria and how they filter out, the poo from all the water. And then finally, when the water is put back into the stream or river or lake or whatever it might be, how generally it's usually cleaner than what the upstream water is. And I mean, that 3-4 days, you could probably have something like that real easy for something like that, I would think.
I actually worked in the lab at a wastewater treatment plant for 3 years before I went back to school to be a teacher. So each plant, for the most part, has a lab too that you could go in where they're doing testing and stuff. So if you could incorporate some of that into like your measurements that you're doing in your first unit, maybe you could talk to whoever does their testing in the lab and see like what kind of measuring and testing they do and that sort of thing. And then you could show them like, this is where we use this. This is something that gets used in the real world, in the water that you use every day, that sort of thing.
That's great. Thank you.
So let's think about potential questions. Like, how could we take this whole idea of what is science And how can we turn that into like a more specific, open-ended question that will give them a project to work on, right? So let's play with that. Maybe how can we increase our own scientific literacy? Can we work on a question that has to do with like the wastewater thing? Because I think that's some rich fodder for some questions.
You know, maybe what is science? What I stress with my kids, just about everything they do involves science. So, you know, what do you do that doesn't involve science? Maybe, you know, from that angle, or, you know, what do you do on a daily basis that you use science and you don't even really actually think about it, whether it be physical science or life science, or
How does it impact our daily lives?
I'm recording. How does science impact our daily lives? There's probably like a careers lens in there, right? Maybe like something about jobs in our community that connect to science. Deb, you said sixth grade?
Yes. Yes.
Could there be some sort of question, if you're just going to focus on this idea of what is science? Could you just have a question that's, how can we have our community better understand the importance of science? And then those kids, their whole project could be around becoming advocates for science. Right? And then you could do ask, imagine, plan, test, improve. And maybe you could have each group take a different aspect of science or a different type of business that they could do exploration in. So let's say you have all the kids do an exploration about how does science show up in manufacturing? Right? Since you're going to be like newly minted manufacturing somewhat expert. And then, as Sarah was saying, like the measurement pieces, you could have people do best practices in labs. You could do things around information literacy. You could talk about like how statistics show up. I feel like how could our community better understand the importance of science in our daily lives is particularly relevant when we talk about coming out of the pandemic, when there have been all of these people like freaking out about the fact that like, we can't believe the science and the science has changed every day. You could even do like an exploration about like, why has it changed? It's changed because we're living in the design cycle. And when we know more information, we change what we do. Someone else was starting to say something brilliant as I was talking. So if we were to take this idea of how can we have our community better understand the importance of science in our daily lives, is that a question that we could play with for a second? Or does someone want to give us another idea of a question that we could play with for a second? And then we can just brainstorm some activities and how we might do this. Like, let's make up a question and pretend like this is going to be Deb's PBL.
Is this question, I mean, to me, it sounds like it's really, really broad.
Okay, so modify the question a little bit.
I guess I'm not a super creative guy. I'm not sure how I would even approach that.
What are some ways that we can educate the community, or what are some ways that we can impress upon the community the need for the increased scientific literacy or understanding of science? Not really sure.
Let's keep it real simple. How can we help our community understand the importance of science?
I think you need to leave it broad enough for the kids to have growth and movement within it.
Okay.
To do their discovery. I think if you narrow it too much, you're going to be pinpointed into one direction. So if we're trying to just find an overarching thing, I think keeping it broad would be great.
This broad or broader?
I think this is fine, or as what you had before was fine as well.
Okay. We'll add the in our daily lives. Let's just pretend. And I think this is what you do. I think you have to like go back through every person that does PBL says the driving question is the hardest part, right? All right. So ask. Let's
I was
just
actually going to say, like, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say the more broad the question initially, it's like, to me, that's going to help you start up with PBL. And we've all said, like, it's okay to start small but in order to start small, I feel like a broader question is better initially, at least.
Yes, but then sometimes it's too broad, and then it creates a situation where your like research is all over the board, and then kids can't bring it down to create a prototype. So finding that sweet spot between broad enough to go somewhere, as Andrea was talking about, but small enough to make it so that the project eventually ends is
right.
That sweet spot that we're looking at. So I hear you, and I think there's another side to that.
Yeah, I guess don't be overwhelmed by the broadness, I guess is the way I feel, like necessarily initially.
Mm-hmm. And I think if we focus on our community, it gives kids an opportunity to really think. And you can define your community as like your whole state, people in your like actual county, like your city, whatever you want to do. You can determine the parameters of that. But if we were at the ask stage of this, what are some questions that you could sort of like, let's root up some questions about science. So what's one question about science in our community?
I don't know about that. I was just thinking about all the different areas of science that could be brought out of that one project. I don't know, maybe that's too broad.
What are the different types of science? That's a great first question. What's the next question?
There's some stuff in the chat saying stuff like, what if we didn't have it? What if we didn't have science in the community? So I think those are good points.
I can't see the chat. Can someone help me with that?
I think what you said before about the jobs, I know the person that's over our local water department just was offered a $50,000 raise to deal with some stuff that's going on. And he actually left and went to work at the Air Force Base right down the road and has been our water manager for 25 years. So there's some, I think we have an Air Force Base, University of Tennessee Space Institute is right down the road. So there's a lot of science here and a lot of different careers that deal with science. Some of the subcontractors to the Air Force Base, I mean, the wind tunnels that they've built there and the top secret things that they do. So I think the jobs, that would be a really eye-opening thing for the kids, I think, to see things are just right here local, especially in the manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. Another question, what does our community think about science? right? Like, do they understand science? You could take a poll. You know, kids love doing polls with people. All right, imagine. For this, if we know that there's like all this stuff about science, let's spend some time imagining what sort of investigation students could do around science.
They could try to research a career, and if they know enough about what science is, pull out what sort of science is being used in that career or job.
Okay, that's good. Ooh. And I think as you go on, like I just had a modification, potential driving question. How do scientists, this could be really good for EDP. How do scientists, or how do people in our community use science to solve problems? Right? So then each group could figure out who uses science to solve problems. Right? And then the problem with this one, and this is what happens, right? So I think that even though we're kind of going around in circles, this is the process of figuring out a good PBL. So each group could figure out who uses science to solve problems. Then we got to bridge this to how do we create a project, or what's the, you know, the thing that kids are going to like create to be able to share this with other people, right? Because you have to be able to create like a project with this.
Well, different groups could be doing the science that they found was done in different manufacturing careers. Like I don't want to say necessarily replicate the process, but you know, they could do some sort of original thing that would be done in that career. Like as a water treatment facility plant, you know, they would do something that they would do there. And if they were a park employee, they would maybe, you know, show what how they would use science there.
That's where I come into. If I just had 25 kids, the same 25 kids all day, I can see how to, that would be wonderful. I could manage that. But having 100 kids and having multiple, you know, teams trying to replicate that I just don't know if I could, you know.
Okay, so let's scale back. I hear you, Deb. I think you're absolutely right. But Chip, I hear you. What if we combined your ideas? What if we said, how do, where's that question about how do scientists use, what's the question about how do scientists, something about, oh, how do our people use in our community to use science to solve problems? Let's go back to that one for a second. Right? Like, so let's say we're playing with this for a second. And then the kids do a little bit of research. So first ask like who uses science to solve problems? Like who? Right? Then you come up with a business. Then you could have the kids maybe come up with a problem, right? That's related to their business.
Oh, something that just popped in my head was agriculture and our agricultural extension offices. You know, they are always more than willing to come in the schools, and it's a pretty rural area.
tons, the extension people are your best friends. They're always looking for something to do and they have money. But even if you just have the kids come up with a problem, right? That scientists need to solve. And then their prototype potentially. We think that scientists should solve the problem of our Fruit Loops being too soggy, right? And I don't know, I'm coming up, I'm not going anywhere with this. But could it just be they have like presentations about research we use? I was somewhere and then I lost it. It was combining Chip's idea with Deb's idea. How do people in our community use science to solve problems? Research who uses science, businesses, what kind of problems do they solve? Help me, guys. Where can we take this? What kind of question would the kids do then? Even if it's a bad idea, throw it out.
Are we trying to funnel it down into something more specific or not?
We're trying to, like, let's say our driving question was, how do people in our community use science to solve problems? And then I started to think, okay, the first thing you could do is just like get kids to have an understanding of who uses science.
Right.
Right. And then the next step is, oh, maybe it's how can we use, like, so they go bigger to smaller.
Yeah.
Right.
Funnel it down. So you wanted to talk about the water problem maybe or not?
Maybe.
So, you know, where does, if you wanted to funnel it down into a specific area, you know, where does the water go when it rains? You know, if, and maybe I'm totally off track here, maybe you want to stay with careers and areas of, you know.
I think it's around this idea if she's doing lessons, if the whole big topic is why science matters. We want kids to do an investigation. And I think the place we started to go was like, how do we tell others about why science matters?
Okay.
And then we have to do some sort of investigation or come up with a solution to the problem to be able to help people understand why science matters. Right?
Yeah.
I think maybe I might start understanding kind of, I'm trying to get my arms around this a little bit. Could kids maybe reflect on everything they do during the day that involves science? Every time they get a drink, that involves a water treatment plant. Every time they flush, it involves a sewage treatment plant. When they get into their car, it involves a automotive factory and the safety that's involved and everything. Is that kind of what you were thinking? Or maybe that's one way of narrowing it down?
What if we do this? What if this is it? That's not it. My screen moved on me. What if it's this? Can you see my screen? Right? What if we as sixth graders help our community understand the importance of science? Right? And so you do an investigation, like who's doing science? And then the kids will be like, oh my gosh, everything in our community relates to science. How the roads are made relates to science. How our water relates to science. How our stuff is manufactured is relating to science, blah, 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 blah. And then let's say they pick a focus area, whether it's water or roads or food or whatever. And then they have to create some way to communicate the importance of science to people in their community.
I love that. Please don't lose.
Done.
Can,
Done.
I'd-
Does that help?
yes, tremendously.
Done.
Yes.
And that's your first quarter standards, right? And so let's use this as our driving question and really quickly work through the design cycle because I feel like we're finally somewhere. Ask. Why is science important? Everyone jump in and do some, let's come up with some activities that will help kids start to unpack this idea of why is science important. What would you do in the classroom?
Every time a child leaves to go to the bathroom, you could say that's why science is important.
Okay. What else?
As like a hook moment, maybe you could take like everything in the classroom and put it in a pile where they come in and there's no desks, there's no chairs, there's nothing.
And then what?
Just to kind of get them to see like science is in everything.
Right? Remember when Scott came on the very first day and he talked about from the morning, the time you woke up in the morning, your bed was manufactured by someone, your cup was manufactured by someone, you know, there was like material science in your toothbrush. How do they know that those polymers come together to make a plastic toothbrush? Right? So you could even like do something in the classroom. Maybe you don't put everything in a pile, but you look around and you try to get them to just brainstorm a giant list of all the science they see. I can't even type.
You could talk about everything involved when they go through the lunch line. I mean, all the different planting it, growing it, any fertilizer has to go on it, and all that. I mean, behind agriculture, there's a gazillion things going on. How the plant grows itself, even when it gets there, all the different inspections the food has to have, and you know, the people that are doing it, and what science do they use to make sure it's clean, healthy, nourishing. And I mean, you could just go on just from the lunch line.
Yep. That's great. All right.
The only thing I would think of too is I think the classes are only 45 minutes long. So I would really narrow down that time frame there of what they're looking at as far as, is it from when they get up in the morning to when they arrive at school? Or is it from the moment they step in school till lunchtime? Just so you're not taking a ton of time, but really you can focus in. I think you can cover most of your bases just within a short window of time.
The other thing you could do if you had a couple of days, you could look at it from different lenses every day, right? Like as an introductory activity, you could say, look at everything that was manufactured today. Look at everything that, all of the thing that you just did, Dave, was brilliant, right? Like planting, growing, fertilizer, harvesting, blah, 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 blah. Like you could do that for life science. You could probably even do that like from the perspective of pets. You know, you could take a number of different things and just help them as like a really, really big brainstorm activity, you know. And if we go back to our driving question, how can we help our community understand the importance of science? Like another way to take that is like, why does our community need to know about science?
Okay, silly question. Do you, I mean, in order to wrap this up, would you have like a group pick one thing and then maybe they could make a video that would be shown, you know, supposedly to the community that says any of those that, pick one of them and why it's important? Would that be the last way of narrowing it down?
So this is just the beginning, I think, right? First, we got to get the kids to start thinking about why science is important. This is just the exploration phase. So eventually, we're probably going to come up with like 5 or 6 different options, like a choice board for how kids will share with the community the importance of science. But what we're doing right now is starting to build the kids' expertise and understanding themselves about why science is important.
Okay.
Does that help?
I
So,
think,
like, so yes, but not yet. Because if we're going to take 2 weeks to do this probably, or maybe, 2.5 weeks. So if over 10 class periods, you're going to start to unpack this concept of why is science important. Then, if you're having the kids work through the process. So we go back to this driving question. How can we help our community understand the importance of science? Like, how can we have our community maybe we show our community where science shows up, because they will started to do a little bit of exploration themselves, like, oh my gosh, science is everywhere. Science is in the news. So how can we have our community understand the importance of science? We can show them where science shows up. What else can we do? This is just the brainstorm part. All the different ways that we can show our community the importance of science.
I'm just thinking, like, she had listed so many different community partners that were available, and I'm sure they all have websites. If once they have narrowed down their particular branch of science that they're working on, if they could create a video to upload to that corresponding business or particular outreach where community members could go to watch the video.
Yeah. Create videos. You could do some sort of like public service PSA.
That's what I was just thinking. I have a good relationship with our newspaper and our radio station here. That would let us put some public service announcements on the radio, probably.
You could do a study of all the businesses in the community that relate to science somehow. Science matters to our community because science employs a bunch of people in our community. Science helps people pay their mortgage, right? Lots of places, like we have a big PPG plant. There's a ton of people that work just to make paint, and they do a ton of science there, right? Okay, so this is like some good samples. What's our next step in the design cycle? Plan, right? Plan how you are going to showcase the importance of science. So you're just going to pick away, and maybe you'll give them like a choice board right there. Cool. Create. So here's where they make their prototype or their thing. So when you have kids build a prototype, what you want to do is give some specific parameters about what it is they have to do. So let's pretend that their sort of presentation, their prototype. You have to give them some parameters, right? So like, let's say that they were making a video. You have to specify how long the video needs to be. The format, right? Like, do you want it to be, do you want to upload to Google Drive? What kind of content do they need to cover? Do they have to have 5 facts? Great. Do they need, you know what I mean? Like, you have to give them some parameters. Otherwise, you're not sure what you're going to get. So for each type of prototype that you have on the choice board, you have to be able to create some specifications, which is going to help you build your rubric, right? Like, your video created 5 facts. Great. You get 5 points for that, or whatever you want to do. So here you've got your specification so that you can give them a grade. I'm looking for something real quick that I pulled up a second ago. Give me 1 second. Design brief. I'm going to take a second and I'm going to share this with you guys, because this is a framework that they use at the Metro School to be able to, on a 1-page, give kids access to, can you see this design challenge, design brief document? Great. This was a couple of years ago. They did smart mobility. So the challenge idea for the example that we're using is, why is science important? Then there's a central question. How can technology be used to create a transportation system that provides access opportunities for all people? Your essential question is going to be, how can we as 6th graders communicate the importance of, I lost it, guys, I'm sorry. Communicate the importance of science to the community, right? Yeah, sorry about this. I'll share this in the chat so we don't lose it again. Design statement: research a problem resulting from current transportation systems and develop a solution based on futuristic technology. Yours could be research a business that uses science, or research a scientific problem that's in our community and then share with people about why it matters. Pick the audience. The audience is going to be people in your community. And then constraints. Here it says, like an engineer, your group will plan, sketch, and create a prototype of your solution from one of the prototype choice board options. Create a presentation and present your ideas to a panel of your classmates and teachers at an in-house competition. So as you're building out your 2-week unit, or your 15-day unit, whatever it is, you're going to begin with the end in mind and think about, like, okay, there's going to be a presentation on this day. What do we need to do to create a back map to get there? And when does this need to be done? And when does that need to be done? And all of that.
Can I interrupt you for just a second?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I was kind of under the impression for this problem-based learning, maybe it's because you use, like, they use the word prototype, but I was kind of under the impression that we were supposed to make like an object and not just a presentation.
Sure, you absolutely can, and that's certainly encouraged.
Okay.
And those kids, and a lot of it depends on the subject that you pick, right?
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking something with plants, and we might not be able to get our hands on the trees exactly, but they could, they could kind of draw or present what they would do if they can't get their hand on the actual seed or whatever.
Jenny, you're 1000% correct.
Okay.
Okay. So, by that point in the fall, you might be able to get some stuff, like little, like, you might be able to go to Lowe's or Home Depot or Walmart or somewhere and raid the garden centers.
Yeah.
You might have people that have planted a bunch of stuff and have a bunch of stuff to use. Like, you might be able to, like, dig around your community and find stuff. But yeah, when in doubt, you can have your babies draw things. Mm-hmm. They can build with clay. They can use construction paper. You can use cardboard, like whatever.
But that's not a mandatory part.
It's not mandatory.
Do
I think that you're going to get the most bang for your buck when you have your kids build something.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that when you think about your PBL, one of the things that you want to shoot for is to be able to come up with something where they can build a physical prototype, because I think that that's one of the things that makes it fun and engages those learners that aren't super excited about making yet another PowerPoint.
Yeah, okay, all right.
You know,
thank you.
however, in the question that we talked about yesterday with Travis was talking about, well, shoot, my kids aren't going to have the coding skills, you know, the first 9 weeks of school to really build, you know, some program. Well, that's when you can go back to, well, we're going to make a storyboard of that. We're going to make a flow chart, right? So you figure out what your best possible outcome is. Like in the example that you gave, like, let's grow trees. Well, we're not going to grow trees by the end of the week. So what can we do? How can we have some approximation of those trees today? Because, you know, if you were able to do a 9-month PBL, super. So I know that this was a little bit bumpy, but I think that that's helpful to show that, like, it's going to be a little bit bumpy, but you got to spend some time like figuring out what that problem is and work it back and refine and refine and refine. And Deb, you could take this and refine it even further and say, how does science show up in manufacturing? Like, if you really want to keep it true to sort of the spirit of MEEP, and how could we, and Lord knows, with all the supply chain issues that we've been having, you could certainly say, how can we communicate the importance of manufacturing to our community?
Absolutely, because we have enough here that they could, you know, contact that company, that we could narrow it down to that. I have one more question.
Sure.
I have to teach this. Drives me insane that they did not start the year with what is science and what is the engineering design process. However, it is not a state standard specifically. But you have to start there, because a lot of these kids come in and they've had science on Fridays, maybe, in elementary school. So, and now they have it every day and they're expected, and the curriculum's hard. It's very broad. So there's not really a standard attached to this. So how do I get around that? I did see one example that you sent that, you know, had a PBL that said, you know, there wasn't an exact state standard. However, this is, you know, a basic knowledge, you know, basic.
Scientific literacy is a standard, even if it's discreetly not stated. Like, you know, being a science teacher, that kids need to understand basic, just sort of, this is introductory content. So while there's no standard, this is introductory content around scientific literacy, and that's fine. That is totally fine. So big takeaways from this is your driving question is going to go through probably a bunch of different iterations as you start to create your back map to be able to figure out what it is you want the product to be, how long you want it to take, what standards you want to have covered, what community partners you want to bring in. And if for this time you can't bring in community partners, and the way that you incorporate community partners, one of the things that you can do is just get your kids to research what manufacturing companies are in here, or, you know, whatever, using Deb's specific example. Let's say she refines this, how do we communicate to our people? But yeah, we experienced that her question that she selected does not lead really nicely to physical prototypes, but it's still a valid PBL. So I think one of the things where people struggle with this is, like, there's a lot of gray area. At the end of the day, we want your kids to have experience using the engineering design process and think about being problem solvers and innovators in new ways. And as our panelists said 1,000 times, do it in a way that makes sense for you. Okay, what I'd like to do is to spend a little bit of time in a couple small groups taking a look at how you did on your standards alignment, okay? I know that not everybody got that done. I know we have our people who are flexing in from next week. But I would like for you to break into groups. We're going to do elementary, middle, and high school. And really, I just want you to have a conversation about like, how did it go? And even if it didn't go. So I want us, can you still see my screen? How did it go? What did you learn? Do you have any initial ideas about what you might do based on exploring the standards? What you might do, i.e. for your project? If you get in there and you're like, I didn't explore the standards yet, you can say that. Like, it's okay. We know we've got people who haven't even like had access to this assignment yet, who are going to be in small groups. So you guys can just listen. Or if you have standards that you've already thought about, you can talk about those. But let's take about 15 minutes to talk about how things went for your standards exploration. If you want to, you can pull up your document and share it with your group, but just make sure that everyone who has anything to say gets a chance to talk. We'll go for 15 minutes. We'll talk about just the standards and if anyone has any revelations, because I feel like if you work in your grade bands, you'll be able to maybe like help each other go, oh, I didn't think about that standard. I'll do that one, and give you a chance to hear how other people sort of approached this. So I'm going to create 3 breakout rooms. We're going to let the participants choose the rooms. We're going to just talk about this. You guys don't have to write anything down, just have a conversation about how you might work on creating connections to your particular standards to your PBL that you have to make. Let me create these rooms. Elementary, middle, high school. I'm going to open all rooms. You're going to join the rooms and we'll come back at 11:50.